Our first speaker is the Director of Southeast Asian Center and Director of the Global Knowledge Center on Crop Biotechnology of the International Service for the Acquisition of Agri-biotech Applications, or we call it ISAAA, others call it ISAAA. She leads the development and publication of the annual global status of the commercialized biotech/GM crops, or the ISAAA briefs. She has published 31 papers in scientific journals and proceedings, very prolific, and chapters in 2 books of biotechnology. She holds a PhD in botany from Purdue University, Indiana, USA, and postdoctoral fellowship at Albert Ludwigs University, Freiburg, I hope you pronounce that right, Germany. And guess what? That's on golden rice. Today, she will give us an overview of modern biotechnology, which includes its adoption status and products in the pipeline. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rhodora Romero Aldemita. Dr. Ola, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon to everyone. It's evening my time. I'm here in California, so it's very nice to be a part again of this Pan-Asia Farmers Exchange. Since Sony started conducting this one, I think I haven't missed any forum. I always was the first speaker because of the overview on GM crops. So with that, I'd like to share my screen. Or is that? Okay. Okay, slideshow. Play from start. Okay. So this is the, okay. Yeah, so my topic is the overview of biotechnology and GMOs. When I started my PhD, well, when I was still at Erie, we have been trying to develop biotech crops, biotech rice, and currently biotech crop or GM crops are synonymous. So when I mention biotech and GM, it's interchangeably used at this presentation. So currently, this is now the accepted definition of biotechnology. It's any technique that uses whole or part of a living thing to make new products, improve or develop plants, animals, and other organisms for specific use. So I would highlight it could be a whole or a part of a living thing and its use for improvement. So those are the key words that we need to remember. So when we talk about biotechnology, we look at its scope. So first, we start with fermentation, biofertilizers. So here we use whole organisms. So we use microorganisms to use to develop fermented products, biofertilizers. But as we go up to the ladder, we can see that here in plant tissue culture, monoclonal antibody production, we now use parts of those organisms. And as we go up, we see that we use much smaller segments of the organism up to the DNA level. So at the same time, for animals, that is also happening. So from big organisms, so this is now the bigger organs up to the smaller ones where we have genetic engineering of animals. So when we say biotechnology, we cover from the old or the conventional biotechnology to the modern biotechnology. But now let's move at what is the basis of biotechnology. Every one of us contains cells, or all parts of our body contain cells. And within that, we have the nucleus, the chromosomes, and then the DNA. And the DNA of all organisms are composed of pairings of nucleotides. So this is thymine paired with adenine, guanine paired with cytosine. So even if you're a human being, plant, animal, or microorganisms. Every one of us contain this sequence, and we can only have uniqueness with some types of specific DNA segments to make ourselves unique. So this means that we can have interchanged or we can exchange DNA from one organism to another, which is one of the many ways by which we can develop improvements in our organisms or whatever organisms we desire. So this is the way we do genetic engineering. We isolate the gene, we put it in a vector. It's in a gene construct now. Then we introduce it to plant cells. So I'm now using plants as an example, which is rice. And then we can introduce genes through particle bombardment and then through agrobacterium, which is a bacteria which will contain the gene construct, and then the bacteria will will go through the cellular mechanism so that the DNA can integrate into the nucleus. And then we can have a selection of the callus, regenerate into plants. The plants can be screened in the screen house or the greenhouse, tested in the field, in one location, and then in multi-location. Now, all of these steps cover regulation. Most of the laboratories establish their lab or genetic engineering lab with the guidance of the National Committee on Biosafety. So each country should have an oversight on the laboratory first, and then on each part of the development of the biotech crop. And it is very essential that countries which conduct this type of work should undergo or should be covered by regulation in their countries. So as we go forward, we see that there are now different products of biotechnology which have been developed. So we have um, products which will help us in fighting diseases, just like what we have now, fighting COVID-19 through mRNA, which is a product of biotech. So we have, you already know that Pfizer, Moderna are mRNA vaccines. So this is through biotech. We have increasing yield because we include or introduce genes to increase yield of crops, environment-friendly products, safer crops, nutritious food, just like beta-carotene-enriched rice, better industry with more biomass in crops so that we can use it for biofuels. So all of this has been ongoing for the last 25 years. And so this is why we use biotech crops. Because why? Because we have high global population. Currently in 2020, we have 2021, we already have 7.9 billion people, and it is estimated that it's going to go up to 9.7 to 10.7 billion, and it needs 70% increase in food production. That is really immense, and it is a challenge to all our farmers to do this. We also have problems on climate change. Accompanying these problems are biotic and abiotic stresses. These are problems which we were not there before when we didn't have the climate change. But now we have new species of diseases, insects that affect our crops. And then we also have climate, extreme temperatures, submergence, or a lot of water, or sometimes no water at all, such as drought, which has been affecting some of the countries. Now, all of this, the interplay of high global population and climate change affects food insecurity and undernutrition in low-income countries. And currently, the United Nations has embarked the SDG 2, or Sustainable Development Goal 2, which has the goal of zero hunger by 2030, and it requires biotech applications. And these are the reasons why we need biotech crops. So now I'm going to discuss with you what's going on in terms of a GM or biotech crops. So this is a data of 2019. We have been looking at the data from 1996. So it looks like it has been going up. And by 2019, we had 190.4 million hectares, with 105.7 million hectares planted in developing countries and 84.7 million hectares for industrialized countries. So you see that there are now more countries planting by the crops, more developing countries planting by the crops, because they see the immense benefits that they can get from these crops. And these are now the 29 countries which were recorded to plant by the crops in 2019. So there were 29, and 44% of those, and 44.1% also in Latin America and in the North Americas, 10.23 in Asia, 1.54 in Africa, and two countries, or 0.06% in Europe, where we have plants only BT corn planted only in Spain and Portugal. Now, I'd like to highlight with you the new countries which planted by the crops last year. They were Malawi, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. So these are very exciting times. And if you're following our biotech CBU, the Crop Biotech Update, we again have a new country which planted this year in 2021. So as we move forward, let's look at the top 5 countries which have planted biotech crops. So these are US, Brazil, Argentina, Canada, and India. And looking at the adoption rate, you can see that it's near saturation or near 100%. So this shows us that we need more crops, more traits, so that they can reach into, they can expand their areas planted to biotech crops. And it is also interesting to note that there were 3 developing countries, Brazil, Argentina, and India, who planted biotech crops. And they planted, these 5 countries, if you add all of this, they cover 91% of biotech crops in 2019. That's how important these 5 countries are. So looking at the crops, in North America, they plant more biotech crops compared to the other parts or to the other regions of the world. So we have maize, soybeans, cotton, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa, papaya, squash, potato, and apples. And now here in our part of the world, Asia and the Pacific, we have cotton planted in India, Pakistan, China, Australia, and Myanmar. Then maize, we have Vietnam and the Philippines. Canola, we have it in Australia. Eggplant, of course, in Bangladesh for now. Sugarcane in Indonesia, and safflower in Australia. So you can see the biotech area planted in these parts of the world. In terms of crops, biotech soybean has been planted mostly in high area, in greater area. So it's 91.9 million hectares. We have 60.9 biotech maize, and then cotton, and then canola. So you can see here the fluctuations. These depend on the price, the global price, the climate of those countries planting these crops. Sometimes if there is too much drought, or there is submergence or a lot of water, so it also affects the high and lows of these lines. Now I have highlighted here that Brazil surpassed the US biotech soybean area by 15% in 2019. And this is because Brazil is becoming or using much more varieties or more genetics. And also they already have this soybean which has the stock traits in it. And so this is a momentous event for Brazil, because they have surpassed the US in terms of the hectares. Now, globally, we can see that for 32.4 million hectares planted to cotton, 79% is already GM. For soybean, it's 74% is already GM. So whatever we eat, which is soybean based, is already GM. Maize is 31%, and canola is 27%. So still, we have a lot of areas to consider for planting biotech maize. And in our region, Asia Pacific, we have 17 countries adopting biotech crops. So you see here the 9 countries which are planting in green, and then these are now the importing countries. So we are proud that it's only a few more countries which do not plant as yet, and we hope that they would in the very near future. In terms of traits, we see here that herbicide tolerance used to be the dominant trait from 1996. But then you look at the downhill line here, and then you see the stack traits, which has been going up. And currently in 2019, there were more stack traits area planted. There is a higher area planted to stack traits compared to herbicide tolerance. And of course, the insect resistant one is still going up and down and still at the bottom. So our farmers, you farmers, are learning that the trick that stack traits is better off because you have more good traits, good genetics at your hands when you use stack trait varieties. Now, looking at the expanding adoption of biotech food, feed, and crops, the crops that were included in the data that I have provided you, all came from corn, canola, cotton, and soybean. But now we're looking at new crops, new traits, just like non-browning potatoes planted in the US and Canada, non-browning apples in the US. Of course, we have Bangladesh planting eggplant, and then the Philippines, we have already an approval of the food, feed, and processing application has been approved. So we're now gearing up the production, the propagation approval. We have low lignin alfalfa, and then insect-resistant sugarcane in Brazil, drought-tolerant sugarcane in Indonesia. They have been planting it for the last 2 years. And high oleic acid in Australia for safflower. And then, of course, the very famous pink pineapple in Costa Rica. So with this, ISAAA is following the regulatory approvals in many countries. So if you would like to go and see the ISAAA.org website, we have the GM approval database, and we're recording all of the approved events for since 1992. So we had 72 countries already issuing approvals with 4,485 approvals in 32 crops, 539 approvals from the US, which has the highest. Maize has the largest number of approved events, and of course, herbicide-tolerant maize for NK603 has the most approval. So if you would like to see the most updated record of approvals, you can go to ISAAA website and look at their specifics. So moving on, we have here the new approvals for cultivation, and these are new traits. These are drought-tolerant cotton, low gossipal cotton, non-browning apple, omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids in canola, and then, of course, the multi-insect resistance and herbicide tolerance. So these are the crops that we're following, and to report the area planted to these crops by the next few years. Now we have some biotech crops in the pipeline: a non-browning romaine lettuce, drought-tolerant wheat, Colorado beetle-resistant potato, nutrient use efficient and water use efficient and salt-tolerant rice being developed in the US and in Africa. And of course, the project very close to my heart, of course, is the golden rice, where when we started this in 2005 when I was still a postdoc in Germany. And now we have already the propagation approval. I think Dr. Russell Reinke is going to talk about that. And then we have the BT eggplant, which is also underway for regulatory approval for propagation. So I'm just going to highlight with you the contribution of biotech crops to food security, sustainability, and climate change. And this is a report by Graham Brooks in 2020. So we have increased production, we conserve biodiversity, provide a better environment, reduce carbon dioxide emission, and of course, it helped alleviate poverty and hunger in more than 17 million farmers and 65 million people. So how can we make sure that all of these benefits can be attained or benefited to our farmers? So this is because we need to be diligent, we need to look forward looking, to have forward looking regulatory steps based on science, critically looking at the benefits instead of risks. We should have agricultural productivity with environmental conservation and sustainability. And we have to have utmost consideration to millions of hungry and impoverished population. So still, our region is being identified as having a lot of problems by FAO with population growth, climate change, agricultural productivity, transboundary pests and diseases, nutrition and health, and food losses and waste. So let us still continue on with biotechnology to meet the 50% increase in food demand by 2050. So with that, thank you very much. I'd like to invite you to come to our website and look at some of the materials that we have coming up or coming from the derivatives of Brief 55 and many other materials for biotechnology, which can help you in your learning process. So thank you very much. And I hope you learned something.